Anthony Bourdain killed himself on the 8th of last month, which by today's standards for news cycles makes it ancient history. Just the same, and despite the fact that I've already done a talk on this, I want to take a second look at what happened considering information that has come to the surface in the days after his death. I took the position in the first talk, and still do, that his suicide was primarily a product of being suicidal. Or in other words, he died because he wanted to. No great mystery to unwrap. Well, unless you're one of the nutcases I found in the comments who are bent on claiming that Bourdain's supposed suicide was actually a CIA black op conducted on behalf of Hillary Clinton. I have taken the liberty to assume, to hope actually, that this is the same group of intellectual cripples that claim that school shootings, like the one in Florida, were also staged by government agents. Stupid, people. It grows on trees these days. Alex Jones-worthy conspiracies aside, there's another reason to take a second look at the death of Anthony Bourdain. The story behind it is a worthy one, in spite of the result, which, as I've already belabored, had a fixed outcome. Anthony Bourdain was bound to take his own life, driven by some form of clinical depression. Life trapped in an anhedonic fog would eventually do him in. He was destined to find a reason to kill himself. What is interesting to me is his reason, his personal backbreaking straw, and it appears to have been a familiar trait in so many men of his ilk. Toxic masculinity. And yes, it is surely, most certainly, a thing. It's not the bullshit you hear about from feminists. That toxic masculinity mostly exists in the warped minds of the gender studies crowd. Toxic masculinity, though, the kind I'm talking about, is actually something much more real. And Anthony Bourdain had it. Really, really bad. In fact, he had such a profoundly toxic sense of his own manhood that it surprises me that it took him almost 62 years to find an existential crisis that would bring the curtain down on his life. To understand this, we need to look at the one factor that can always reliably tell us how sick a man is: his relationships with women. Because relationships, if you'll pardon the religious reference, are God's way of showing us just how sick we really are. In the case of Anthony Bourdain, his primary relationship in life was with a woman named Asia Argento, an Italian actress with a lot of B-roll work. She's also a singer and a feminist activist who levied a claim 20 years after the supposed fact that Harvey Weinstein forced her to give him a massage and forced her to allow him to perform oral sex on her. Yeah. And I'm sure that Argento's desire for fame and fortune in Hollywood had nothing to do with her massaging Weinstein's fat, hairy back or letting him go down on her. After all, women don't do those things for movie roles, right? Anyway, 20 years later, Argento made an Oscar-worthy performance of her totally unsubstantiated claim at the Cannes Film Festival as soon as it appeared that the Me Too movement was gaining traction. In other words, just as soon as there was blood in the water. This is who Anthony Bourdain fell in love with, and not just in love, but crazy in love. After his death, a Mirror article came out titled, and I quote, "Anthony Bourdain was so crazy in love with girlfriend Asia Argento before suicide that friends were worried." It was subtitled, "The intensity of the tragic TV chef's feelings is said to have been a red flag for friends before his suicide." Now, that article, linked, uses unnamed sources which may or may not cast doubts on its authenticity. But Bourdain's well-documented public reaction to Argento's damseling over Harvey Weinstein and the rest of the male world hardly contradicts it. Bourdain wasn't just a supportive boyfriend standing by his girlfriend as she fought through 20 years of oppressive patriarchy to push valiantly for justice. An article in The Independent revealed a streak of sadistic fantasy in Bourdain quite common to toxically masculine men. However much people want to see Harvey Weinstein dead or in jail, he's in fucking Arizona, Bourdain said, unable to resist his trademark condescension of American flyover country. He's in Arizona, eating in restaurants in Arizona, and at off-the-grid restaurants in Arizona, so he can't even eat at the best sushi restaurant in Scottsdale. He's gotta go to some shit-fucking place, Bourdain continued. So, Arizona. I mean, as much as I'd like to see him, beaten to death in his cell. In addition to his thoughts on Arizona being Weinstein's hell, the article, linked below, said, Bourdain also revealed his theory around Weinstein's eventual death, which he imagined will occur in a bathtub. Picturing him naked in his famous bathrobe, Bourdain suggested that Weinstein will be brushing his teeth and holding his cell phone when a massive stroke hits him. Stumbling backwards into the bathtub, Bourdain imagined that Weinstein's life will end as the ex-Hollywood producer scrolls through his contacts list trying to figure out who he can call, who will actually answer the phone. According to Bourdain, Weinstein dying knowing that no one will help him and that he does not look his best will be fitting. All this because Asia Argento claims that Harvey Weinstein forced her to oil up her hands and give the movie mogul a massage, because she alleged that he forced her to allow him to go down on her. One might wonder if, in the fervor of his white knighting, it did not occur to him to ask her what she was doing in Harvey Weinstein's hotel room. Maybe he didn't even wonder what stopped her from getting up and walking out. Was there a gun to her head? A knife? A threat of bodily harm? Did he put the lotion in her hands? Or did she put it there herself? Where the ever-loving fuck was her agency in any of this? It appears that asking any of these questions wasn't in Bourdain's otherwise considerable skill set. He was too busy donning armor and calling for his trusty steed to bother with a moment's consideration for just how lacking in plausibility Argento's story is. But that is hardly surprising for a man whose feelings for the woman was raising red flags among his friends. Blind infatuation with a woman, the most prolific source of toxic masculinity that there is. It appears that Bourdain's feelings for Argento knew no bounds, not of reason, nor rationality, nor even of basic human decency. And so too were her feelings for him, at least if you take her word for it. I am beyond devastated, she tweeted after hearing of his death. He was my rock. Well, perhaps that's true. Perhaps he was her rock. But it appears that while he may have been her rock, he wasn't her cock, at least not exclusively. In the days just prior to Bourdain's suicide, Argento, 42, was photographed canoodling in public with a French reporter named Hugo Clement, 14 years her junior and 33 years younger than Bourdain, while Bourdain was on set filming an episode of Parts Unknown. An Italian photographer apparently snapped the photos of them in the act and had them online. He reportedly, linked, pulled the pics down immediately after the news of Bourdain's death broke. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of parts unknown here. I can't prove that Anthony Bourdain ever saw those pics, or that he heard the truth about Argento cheating on him before deciding to hang himself in his hotel room just 5 days after those photos were taken. I can't prove that his suicide was even remotely in relation to his relationship with the Me Too posing Argento. But I am satisfied that the series of events point to the plausibility of an Argento betrayal of Anthony Bourdain that served as the final straw on his clinically depressed back, leading to his suicide, and that I can imagine that with a lot more credibility than any ridiculous notion that it was a black operation conducted by the deep state, and more credibly than the notion that the day he committed suicide was arbitrary. Something triggered him to snap, fatally, and my money says it was Argento's knife being plunged through his misguided, chivalrous heart. It appears very likely from the public record that Anthony Bourdain was crazily, toxically in love with Asia Argento, that she cheated on him in public with a man half his age while they were separated by work, and that served as his reward for loving her, for the fake gallantry of white knighting for someone who was ultimately just out for one more ride on the cock carousel. For all his vengeful fantasies and sadistic ideations about Harvey Weinstein's death, it is Anthony Bourdain in the ground. He didn't even have the luxury of being sentenced to life in Arizona. I hope, as always in life, that there's more here than just an opportunity to look smugly on the foolishness of blue pill men, that at the very least their folly in life serves the larger lesson. Surely Anthony Bourdain is dead because he had a malady of thinking, of perceiving life, that diminished its importance to him. That is a formidable thing to oppose both for the victim and the society around them. But what is also apparent here is that for all his creative genius, his uncanny capacity to step outside of himself and shape a story about people and places in the world, he could not apply those gifts to himself. He could not see himself, even for a moment, outside the gynocentric mold. He invested everything, down to his very identity, in a woman, and he inevitably choked on it. I don't feel smug in the least saying all this. There's no gloating here, just gratitude that I found a way of life that tragically eluded Anthony Bourdain. And I hope that anyone contemplating this bad ending is able to see that the ability of a man to reimagine himself away from all this gynocentric madness, this toxic masculinity that perverts and degrades the self, may also bear the ability to beat back the demon of depression, to restore and revitalize not only the will to live, but the determination to do so with passion. And that concludes this talk for today. As always, guys, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.